In the winter of 1995, a mysterious killer murdered 3 men in the small Bay Area town of Ridgewood. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, the killer took another man. First it was Tommy Coulet, then Bobby Calvin, then Bobby Briggs, Tommy, and the 2 Bobbies they called them, like a band. The Ridgewood Recorder, that's the local newspaper that covered this case from the very beginning, they've reported that the killer stalked these men around Ridgewood, watching them from the shadows, waiting for just the right moment to pounce. Police believe he followed 2 of the men to Hunter Hill Rest Stop in Vallejo, a gay cruising spot along Interstate 80. There, amidst a backdrop of wispy fog, lumbering big rigs, and the clattering roar of freeway traffic, the killer somehow talked these men into his car. Then, and this is the surreal part, he drove them all the way back to Ridgewood, about 20 miles or so. There, in a valley on the outskirts of town, the killer, how do I say this? Stomped them to death. Stomped. It's a weird word, I know, but saying they were beaten or assaulted doesn't cover it. I'll get into the details soon enough. They are critically important in linking these first murders to the countrywide trail of terror that followed. But stomped is the best I could do for now. Flattened, maybe. I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. Whatever you want to call it, this is also critically important. No one had any idea at the time, but these first 3 men, Tommy and the 2 Bobbies, they would become the first known victims of the most prolific serial killer in American history. The local newspaper, the Recorder, they called him the Rest Stop Killer. This case, these murders, then and now, it all happened in the sleepy town of Ridgewood, about halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento along Interstate 80. You may have seen a town like Ridgewood. It's a charming town, a throwback town, really. 10,000 or so people. Still has a dairy freeze across from City Hall, a one-screen movie theater downtown, gas lamps, brick sidewalks. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. But every time I think of all that happened here, I'm reminded somehow of a town across the world, in Germany. Stick with me for a minute. This wild detour, and I know it's sudden and far away and seemingly disconnected, but it's key to how this all ends. On March 6, 1981, in a courtroom in Lübeck, Germany, Marianne Bachmeier shot the man who had raped and murdered her 7-year-old daughter. The man had been arrested, he was being arraigned, but Marianne didn't wait for justice to run its course. She smuggled a Beretta into the courthouse and unloaded the entire magazine into the man who had taken her daughter. I hear this a lot in true crime. I hear this a lot from friends, especially girl dads. You might have too. If anyone touches my family, I'll kill them, I swear to God. But you rarely actually see it. So Marianne Bachmeier, she stands out. And I can't help but think of her whenever I think of this case, and Ridgewood, and Tommy, and the 2 Bobbies, and how it all ends. Because imagine it. Someone grabs your loved one, stomps them to death. Your whole world is upended in an instant, and then you find yourself, somehow, magically, in a cramped room with their killer right in front of you. A gun has made its way into your hands. There's no one around, no one to stop you. It's just you and the killer, the man who tore your family apart. I mean, what would you do? This is that story. It's a story that involves a practically unheard of serial killer and how his spree was overlooked in a region that acted like a veritable lighthouse for murderers and rapists, psychopaths and sadists. The Zodiac once haunted this very rest stop and these very roads, and in fact, I can't believe just how much he features into this case as well. Back in the 1990s, the police wondered, was the Zodiac still alive? Was he still working in Ridgewood? One Zodiac suspect lived in Vallejo, where the rest stop is located. Another suspect lived in Fairfield, just the next town over. Even in 2023, when everything finally came to a head, the police were still looking at the Zodiac. At least, sort of. But he wasn't alone. That's the wild thing about this case. It's so strange. The Golden State Killer, the Night Stalker, the I-5 Strangler, and the I-5 Killer, two different murderers altogether, they also roamed these lonely back roads, and police spent years investigating whether Ridgewood victims fell into their traps. It's part of the reason why the rest stop killer went unidentified for so long. There were just too many serial killers prowling these same desolate roads, blending in, hunting, competing. This is also a story about Ridgewood, a small, secretive town on the far overlooked edges of the Bay Area. It's about generational grudges here, about a housing deal worth millions, about dirty politics and chummy links between Ridgewood's wealthiest residents and the police department they practically fund and control. It's a story pieced together from interviews, police, court, and autopsy records, newspaper accounts, archived TV footage, and my own time on the ground in Ridgewood, where I was born. I should mention that for those who haven't heard me talk about this on previous episodes. Ridgewood is my hometown. One of the reasons I felt drawn to this case when resident and crime-adjacent listener Molly Miller reached out for help at one of our live shows. As some of you know from previous episodes, I hadn't been back since I was a child, when things suddenly got complicated. That's not the important part. What is important is this, and I want to be careful here. Usually, these stories take on a familiar pattern. They foreground the killer, valorize him almost. So, yes, this is the story of a sadistic rage killer and how he escaped capture for decades and how he left a legacy of violence across the entire country, small town after small town, year after year, family after family. But it's more than that. Much more. It's a story about lives cut way too short with far too much promise and potential left on the horizon. It's also a story about those left behind, those left with aching holes in their hearts and their search for answers. But really, I think, at its deepest center, it's a story about the ends we might all go to for justice. Or maybe vengeance. I'm still not sure. You can decide for yourself after you hear all the details. Is jail enough for someone who kills your loved one? Or given the opportunity, would you take matters into your own hands? Could you do what Marianne did? Is that even okay? From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, a true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. This story begins on December 23, 1995, with Thomas Coulet, Tommy, to everyone but his mother. Tommy was 30, tall, slim, and achingly handsome. His lake blue eyes drew double takes. Around town, Tommy was considered a full-fledged catch. Young and single, he owned his own business, Tommy's Auto Repair, on Cherry Street. He was thinking about expanding. Things were great. I talked to his father, Bob, who still lives in town. Bob chuckled. He told me how young women would bring their cars into the shop with even the slightest problems, the kind of mechanical issues that I usually solve by turning up the radio. Bob said they were barking up the wrong tree. He told me that from a very early age, he had a sense of his son's sexuality. Bob said they never actually talked about it. Not once. Small town, military father, churchy mom. Tommy's mother declined interview requests. This was the 1990s, the time of don't ask, don't tell. The time of Matthew Shepard. Tommy must have felt so alone. I interviewed Bob at his house in Ridgewood, a 55 and over retirement subdivision with a weedy golf course. Residents puttered around on golf carts, passing manicured lawns with American flags and country kitsch signs in the windows like live, laugh, love. I couldn't help but notice that Bob's one-story ranch house was the only one with a rainbow gay pride flag. He wears a similar lapel pin on every shirt, every day. He told the Ridgewood Recorder back in 2015, "It's the least damn thing I could do, because I drove him away, and I'll be damned if I drive anyone else away." Like many of those left behind, Bob is haunted by what-ifs. What if he had talked about it? What if he said he loved his son, no matter what? Bob wonders, would Tommy have gone out there that night? By out there, of course, Bob meant Hunter Hill Rest Stop, the cruising spot where his boy would meet the man who murdered him. The Ridgewood Police, the FBI, the small-town newspaper, the Ridgewood Recorder, they have spent literally decades going over Tommy's last day, creating a detailed timeline of his final moments. And I have to admit, it's all pretty ordinary, at least until nightfall. That's what makes Tommy's story so strange. Police were able to track by almost the minute where he went all day and who he talked to. But after dark, there's a black hole. Over the years, there's been many theories about what happened to Tommy. When he left home, where he went, was he forced, and what happened and why? One theory is that Tommy met his killer at the rest stop after dark. It was just blind bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, wrong man. This is the one I believe. It happens. It happened to my family. The other theory, the one police believe, is creepier, less ordinary. That the killer had been following Tommy all day around Ridgewood, waiting for just the right moment to pounce. Neither theory has ever been confirmed. There's just not enough evidence either way. But here's one thing that sounds more likely than not to everyone. Considering his knowledge of the secluded Lover's Lane in a small valley on the outskirts of town, and considering how comfortable he must have felt to revisit this site time and time again, police always suspected that the killer was a local man, living anonymously in Ridgewood for decades while secretly zeroing in on his next target, his neighbors. And like I said, it all started with Tommy Coulet. Here's what we know. Tommy woke early that Saturday morning, December 23rd, 1995, just 2 days before Christmas. Police knew this because they tracked down his garbage collector, Frank Morgan, who reported that Tommy's house was the only one on Elm Street with lights on before 5:30 a.m. Pretty usual, Frank told police at the time. Tommy was an early riser. Frank had seen this before. This was according to the original witness statements in the case file. Frank passed away in 2006. He was never a suspect. Tommy ran his usual 3 miles around the older section of town. Again, this is from Frank's witness statements. He reported seeing Tommy jogging and waving hello. It was a Saturday, and usually Tommy's auto shop would be closed, especially on a Christmas weekend. But several customers needed speedy repairs before short road trips for the holiday, and Tommy didn't want to let them down. It's this day, Saturday, that police were able to track down nearly every detail of Tommy's final moments. On the way to work, he stopped in at Mix's Diner on Main Street, grabbing a coffee to go and briefly chatting with the old-timers who gathered each morning to solve all the world's problems. This was 7:30 a.m. Exactly. Mix's Diner produced a receipt, 1 large coffee to go. Plus, police interviewed each person at the diner that morning. They were all locals, regulars. No red flags anywhere. Everyone liked Tommy. Just like every other day, Tommy was the first to arrive at his 2-garage auto shop on Cherry Street a little before 8 a.m. It was a skeleton crew that day. He had given everyone except Lizzie Peters the weekend off for Christmas. She was happy for the overtime, she told police. Lizzie reported it was just a typical day, although, come to think of it, maybe Tommy was distracted. Maybe a little. She couldn't remember. Maybe not. Her story changed a little each time she spoke with police, the interview records show. Lizzie has since moved. I couldn't track her down. The key for detectives was that she reported no strange customers, no arguments, no debt collectors, nothing. Distracted. The idea has haunted Bob, Tommy's father. If Tommy seemed distracted, Bob had a theory why. Several, actually. Bob wonders if Tommy sensed he was being stalked, hunted that day. Or more innocently, perhaps he was just nervous about his plans for the night. We'll get to that. The rest of the day looked the same. Ordinary. Boring even. Tommy and Lizzie fixed cars. They chatted with customers, talked about holiday plans. Lizzie said they both clocked out at around 5 p.m. This matches a grocery store receipt found in Tommy's checkbook. They still used checkbooks. He bought 2 greeting cards at 5:15 p.m. from the town Raley's, a supermarket chain. These Christmas cards, probably for his parents, were later found in his kitchen, unsigned. At 5:45 p.m., a neighbor on Elm Street, Margaret Kreber, told police she saw Tommy driving to his house. They waved to each other. This is where the ordinary would become unusual. On an ordinary day, Tommy's arrival home at 5:45 p.m. might have been the last neighbors would see him for the night. He was single and closeted and lonely and usually got up early for work every day. He seemed to exist only for his beloved auto shop on Cherry Street. But also, Tommy was an incurable homebody. Every person I talked to, his dad, his friends, his coworkers, they said to a person that Tommy liked to put on sweatpants, watch a TV show, or curl up with a good book, science fiction was his favorite, and then talk to absolutely no one. It had gotten to the point that friends stopped inviting him to parties, not because they thought Tommy didn't like them or they didn't like Tommy. It was just that they knew Tommy cherished his alone time at the end of the day. Honestly, I hear you, Tommy. But this night was different. Kreber, who lives 3 doors down, was bringing in her trash cans at 9 p.m. when she saw Tommy's 1988 maroon Honda Accord flash its white reverse lights, pull out of the driveway, and cruise slowly down Elm Street. Kreber told all this to Ida Jones, a Ridgewood police officer at the time, being groomed for detective. Jones, now a full-fledged detective, would stick with the case for decades, right until the very end. Kreber told Jones that it stood out, Tommy's car driving away. That's why she remembered. She wasn't snooping or prying. She simply couldn't recall the last time Tommy left so late. So the memory stuck. She was sure of it. Her story never changed over the years, not to the police, the FBI, the newspaper, or any of the media that interviewed her over the years. 9 p.m., it stuck. It stuck with police as well. It was, as far as they could tell, an otherwise ordinary, uneventful day. We've all had them. Wake, work, home, nothing special. But this 9 p.m. trip, it was special. It was the last reported sighting of Tommy Coulet. KCRW-TV later reported that the California Highway Patrol called in Tommy's maroon Honda as abandoned at the Hunter Hill rest stop at 6:31 a.m. the following morning, Sunday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. It's this time, the time between 9 p.m. Saturday night, when Tommy's neighbor spotted him leaving, and 6:31 a.m. the following morning, when his car was first reported by the Highway Patrol, that has become the black hole in this investigation. If police were able to piece together exactly who Tommy spoke with during the day, exactly what time and where he bought coffee and what time he bought cards at the grocery store, they struggled to piece together the story of Tommy's final hours after he left his house at 9 p.m. Let's set the scene for a minute and talk about this timeline between 9 p.m. Saturday and 6:31 a.m. Sunday. The Hunter Hill rest stop where Tommy's car was found is 20 miles west along Interstate 80 in Vallejo on a hill overlooking the bay. It's been rebuilt since 1995, this rest stop, but you can still visit and see the fabulous views, including the spires of the Golden Gate Bridge poking out from the foggy horizon. When I returned to Ridgewood in 2023, I retraced the route from Tommy's house to the rest stop. This route and these timelines became critical in trying to figure out what exactly happened to Tommy, but also in ruling out or ruling in suspects with alibis that seemed solid at first, but a little shakier when put to the road test. So here's what it looked like. Tommy's trip took him from Ridgewood almost immediately onto Interstate 80. His house was located about a half a mile from the westbound on-ramp. After getting on the freeway, he would have gone through Vacaville and then Fairfield, and then finally found his exit for Hunter Hill, which is at the very start of Vallejo, which, you might recall, is the exact city where the Zodiac Killer got his start 25 years earlier. At that hour, with no traffic and no further stops that police were able to discover, that would put Tommy at the rest stop sometime between 9:30 and 10 p.m. at the absolute latest, depending on his speed. He listened to George Michael on the way. There was a cassette tape in the deck, Faith. I can imagine him bopping along, maybe nervously tapping his fingers on the wheel. Singing, maybe. Been there. Honestly, Tommy sounded like such a cool guy. So, police know when he left his house based on the neighbor's witness statement, and they know exactly where he met his killer based on the location of his abandoned car, but how did they meet? Was he followed? Stalked? Was it an arranged meeting? A cruel surprise? Did he go willingly? Was he forced? Was he fooled into thinking he had met Mr. Right on this lonely night just 2 days before Christmas? The questions haunt his father, Detective Jones as well. The two formed a friendship over the years, a father broken by the death of his son, a promising officer driven by justice for a member of her community. Jones didn't come out as gay herself until 2015, but long harbored a determination to find Tommy's killer. Someone was out there, killing her people. Her townsfolk, yes, but her people. So the questions plagued them both. What exactly happened to Tommy Coulet between 9 p.m. and 6:31 a.m.? While we don't know exactly what happened to Tommy at the rest stop, I have a pretty good idea, and I'll share my thoughts soon. We do know exactly what happened to him in Ridgewood. I need to issue a warning here. It gets pretty graphic here for a bit. Normally, I'd avoid the graphic details. There's no need to put families through that. Believe me, I know because, well, of my own family. But it's impossible to tell this story without zeroing in on what the FBI profilers call the killer's signature behaviors, his methods of murder. It tells us so much. So there's your warning. Like I said, Tommy was eventually found the following morning. A local developer, Daniel Palmer, called 911 at 7:33 a.m. to alert authorities to a body on his land in the valley. Remember that name. Daniel Palmer, the town's wealthiest resident by far. Tommy was taken to the Solano County Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy that morning, Christmas Eve day. The report was mistakenly made public early on, and Winnie Freeman, a reporter with the Ridgewood Recorder, managed to secure a copy before a judge hurriedly resealed it after angry calls from cops and prosecutors. In 2023, when I returned to Ridgewood, Winnie shared her copy with me. It details a remarkable litany of injuries. Extensive lacerations to the heart, liver, kidneys, pancreas, bladder, and spleen. The entire thoracic cavity shattered, practically flattened, with bone chips and blood entering what was left of the lungs. The cause of death was officially ruled blunt force trauma, homicide, meaning it wasn't an accident. Someone did this to him, obviously. But the damage was so all-encompassing that examiners just couldn't tell. Was he alive long enough to breathe in all that blood and bone, or did everything just get smushed together? Gruesome, I know, but it becomes a hallmark of this case. Here's another hallmark. His head, legs, arms, they were basically untouched, while his midsection was more or less steamrolled into the ground. There is one caveat. It's important. It was used to distinguish between these killings in the 1990s and those that came in 2023. On the back of Tommy's head, there was a circle of bruising, a contusion in medical terms. I needed to tell you all the details because the injuries told the medical examiners and detectives plenty about who could do this. You may have already pieced some of this together yourself. Officer Ida Jones was training for a detective under the department's only full-time detective at the time, Al Williams, who would become chief by the time I got there. Remember, small town, small police force. According to court records that the Ridgewood Recorder was able to pry loose with a Freedom of Information Act request, Jones wrote in her initial notes, "Suspect hit victim on back of head, stunned him hard, dragged him to the ground, jumped up and down on midsection, repeatedly. Large man, strong, extensive damage." Extensive damage. That's an understatement. But why? And more importantly, who? Police were not just horrified by what they discovered, they were stumped. Tommy's body, the crime scene, they were all over the place. You've probably heard the term modus operandi, MO. That's how a suspect commits his crimes. Signature behaviors is related, but different. An MO can change. In this case, Tommy was lured into a car at a rest stop, but later, other victims were taken differently. The how changed, but the need to do this did not. The stomping on the chest, that's consistent across all victims. That's the signature behavior, something the offender needs to do each time. It's part of the information investigators use to narrow down their pool of suspects. Like Jones said in her initial notes from the crime scene, Tommy's body and the catalog of injuries told investigators the suspect was a man. Statistics on serial killers tell us they usually are. And Tommy was picked up at a gay cruising spot frequented by other lonely or just horny men. It's doubtful Tommy would have gotten into a woman's car. Plus, the suspect was incredibly strong. Strong enough for a stunning blow to the back of the head, maybe enough to knock Tommy out. Strong enough to then drag Tommy around like a rag doll and keep him in place long enough to stomp. Remember, Tommy was also a strong man, ran miles around his neighborhood every morning, kept himself in shape. So Jones was right in her initial notes. Big man, strong, angry. It narrows the pool, but not much. That describes a lot of men, to be honest. I mean, I've been online. So detectives took all the information they could gather from Tommy's body and moved on to the next best set of clues, the crime scene. What I find endlessly fascinating about this case, even though it's just a coincidence, is that FBI profiling really began to take shape in the 1970s in the next town over, in Vacaville, with interviews of the co-ed killer Ed Kemper and Charles Manson. They wanted to know, what makes a serial killer tick, and how can we stop them? But the profiling practice really took off after Silence of the Lambs debuted in 1991, bringing the idea into the public imagination. Indeed, Detective Jones told me in an interview after everything settled down that Ridgewood police did, in fact, reach out to the FBI for help in constructing a profile. To police, Tommy's case seemed so strange and unsolvable at the time. Like I said, all over the place. They had nothing. He drives out to Hunter Hill, meets a man, is driven all the way back to Ridgewood, to his own hometown, and is stomped to death in the valley. It looked like a robbery gone wrong on first glimpse. His wallet was missing. Or maybe it was just a lover's quarrel. But when police inspected Tommy's body and discovered there was something else missing, like a token, they began to fear the worst. And then another man was taken. And then another. Jones said they had no choice. They were in over their heads. They knew it. The Ridgewood police hadn't investigated a homicide for nearly 20 years, and that one was a murder-suicide that was easy enough for anyone to solve. So they called in the FBI in early 1996. Jones said that although this FBI profile did not, in the end, help catch the rest stop killer, it did offer insight into his methods and who they might be looking for. The FBI profiler originally signed to this case, Special Agent Genevieve Johnson, I've actually seen it both ways and couldn't track it down, she retired years ago, said this was the key takeaway. Tommy was likely the killer's first victim. The killer would perfect his methods soon enough. And this was the kicker. She said the rest stop killer would never stop. Ever. One more thing before we get back to the rest stop. Tommy's body provided a better idea of its time of death, narrowing the black hole in the timeline. Medical examiners rely on skin condition, body temperature, stomach contents, liver temperatures, eye conditions, a whole host of tests and exams to determine the time of death, or as close as they can get. It's not like TV at exactly 10:21 p.m., for instance. It was a cold night, and Tommy's organs were crushed. No liver to stab with a glorified meat thermometer. And his body wasn't discovered until 7:33 a.m., an hour after his car was found. As best as they can tell, based on his skin, his cloudy eyes, the presence of rigor mortis or muscle stiffness that sets in roughly 2 hours after death, Tommy was likely killed at about midnight, more or less. Could be sooner, could be later, but that's the ballpark. That's important for later when police deconstructed the alibis of a few suspects. So that narrows things. Tommy left his house at 9 p.m., drove to Hunter Hill, met a man, drove back to Ridgewood, and then was killed at about midnight, a 3-hour window, more or less. So what happened? How did he meet the man who murdered him? Why did he get into that stranger's car, and how did he wind up back home in Ridgewood? Like I said, I have a pretty good idea. It's just achingly tragic. Next time on Crime Adjacent. The FBI profiler Genevieve Johnson, I've seen both ways, really set the scene for investigators, letting Ridgewood police into the mind of the killer and who they might be looking for. For one thing, Detective Jones was right. The killer was most definitely a man. And also, he was a charmer. I'm not trying to glorify this guy, but the truth is, the profile said he was able to talk Tommy into his car, drive him 20 miles back to Ridgewood with no visible signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no binding. He was able to walk with Tommy from the car to a warm pile of hay bales in the valley. A forensic gait analysis said they both walked casually. No stutter steps, no hesitation. The two were basically out for a stroll under the beautiful night sky. Maybe the killer held a gun. It's possible. But profilers have seen this before. For Tommy, it was about connection, about finding someone to be with when he didn't feel safe finding that person in Ridgewood. And under the twinkling stars, on those warm hay bales, just a day before Christmas, maybe he thought finally he had found someone. For the killer, Tommy Coulet was just a part of one big sadistic game that was just getting started. Remember to review and like Crime Adjacent wherever you listen to podcasts. And check out our Patreon page to unlock ad-free listening, bonus information, or to become part of the biggest, nerdiest true crime and criminal profiling reading group you could ever hope to find. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with a reminder, you'll never unhear what happens next week.